Good evening. We welcome you on this very meaningful day, National Previvor Day, the day that we recognize individuals who are survivors of a predisposition to cancer, but who haven't had the disease. This week is National Hereditary Cancer Awareness Week, when we recognize and honor those who have been affected by hereditary cancer. As many as 90% of the millions of people who have a genetic mutation that causes or predisposes them to cancer are unaware of their risk. Please join us in spreading awareness to your friends and family and shining the light on hereditary cancer in order to save lives. Tonight's presentation is the book review and panel event of Beat Breast Cancer Like a Boss, written by award-winning journalist and author Ali Rogin. This will be an evening of powerful storytelling as we dive into the courageous experiences of the previvors and survivors profiled in Ali's book. You will hear from Ali, a previvor herself, as well as Cara De Aguardi and Mary Powell. They will share their inspiring stories, experiences, and advice for tackling hereditary cancer risk, all while never losing sight of careers, families, and goals. My name is Elise Boucher. I'm a previvor, volunteer of Force, and I will be your moderator for this evening. Force is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the lives of individuals and families facing hereditary cancers. No matter your inherited mutation or diagnosis, Force and our trained volunteers are available to help. Visit our website for expert-reviewed information and access to our support programs, including virtual Zoom meetings, our peer navigation matching program, and our online message boards. Thank you for joining us. In Beat Breast Cancer Like a Boss, Ali draws from firsthand interviews of successful, high-profiled women from myriad industries and perspectives to bring together an all-star support and recovery team to inspire anyone learning of an inherited mutation or hereditary cancer diagnosis. We will have the opportunity to hear excerpts from the book, learn about Ali's writing process, and dive into the challenges and decisions our panelists faced. After we hear from Ali, Cara and Mary, we will have a Q&A session to address many of the questions you have submitted for this event. I would like to introduce the panelists for this evening. Ali Rogin is an award-winning journalist and producer with the PBS NewsHour Foreign Affairs team, writing and reporting pieces for television and the web. Her reports have appeared on MSNBC, ABC, SiriusXM, and nationally syndicated FM radio shows. Rogan is a 10-year veteran of DC's political scene, covering the White House, Capitol Hill, and the State Department. This is Ali's first book. Cara De Aguardi is a Grammy-nominated songwriter, former American Idol judge, producer, music publisher, and philanthropist. For the past 5 years, she has been an Herb Alpert visiting scholar at Berklee College of Music. As one of the most successful contemporary songwriters in the world, Cara's songs have appeared on more than 160 million albums. She has won over 20 BMI awards for most performed songs, including BMI's 2007 Songwriter of the Year award. She's collaborated with artists such as Pink, Katy Perry, Celine Dion, Kelly Clarkson, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Miley Cyrus, Santana, and more. Mary Powell served as President and Chief Executive Officer for Green Mountain Power from 2008 to 2020. Mary is nationally recognized as an energy visionary, positioning Green Mountain Power as a leading energy transformation company. In 2014, Mary was recognized by PowerGen as the Woman of the Year. In 2016, Fast Pace Company named Mary one of the 100 most creative people in business. And in 2017 and 2018, Mary was named one of the 25 most influential women in the mid-market by CEO Connection. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our author for this evening, Ali Rogin, author of Beating Breast Cancer Like a Boss. Ali, the floor is yours.
Elise, thank you so much. And thanks to you all for joining. Thanks to all of the incredible panelists who are also part of this. I'm so honored to have this opportunity to talk to you guys about my experience and about this book. So I want to start off by reading some excerpts from the book and telling you a little bit about why I'm here and why I wrote this. As Elise mentioned, I've been in Washington covering politics for 10 years. It is a tough environment, and I'm very used to now grilling top officials at the White House, the State Department, secretaries of defense, state, members of Congress, chasing them through the halls of the Senate, at least pre-COVID times. But 10 years ago, I was a scared out of my mind college senior who had just found out I had a genetic mutation that made it likely that I would probably develop breast cancer at some point. And the reason I learned of that genetic fate is because my father is actually a carrier of the BRCA1 genetic mutation. We are of Ashkenazi Jewish heritage, and it runs very strongly in his family. My aunt, his sister, passed away of ovarian cancer several years before I even knew that I was a candidate for testing. So my father actually grappled for years. He knew that it was a good idea for him to recommend that I, his daughter, get tested because that would actually require me to take some preventative steps. But he didn't know exactly when the right time was to tell me. He had some people saying, oh, you should tell her right now, when I was literally like 12 years old. But he and my mother waited until I was in college. I think I was around a senior when they told me that I should potentially do this. Of course, soon after, they told me that I might be a candidate to be a carrier of this mutation. I'm a very action-oriented person, so I immediately jumped on it. I happened to be going to school at NYU, which has a very prestigious genetic counseling program. And so I was able to get in very quickly with a specialist. And we talked through my family history. And I remember so clearly, she had a white piece of paper and she was drawing my family tree. And anytime there was a family member who had cancer, she would draw a black triangle. And if they had passed away, she would fill in that triangle. So by the end of me going through my family tree, there were black triangles everywhere, and it was very, very scary. But she said, yep, you're a candidate for testing. And so, of course, I went down the hall, Myriad Genetic, or to get my blood test. And I was a little nervous, of course. My mom came with me to when it was time to get the results. We got a little day drunk on Sauvignon Blanc before we went back to the genetic counselor to get the results. And she said I was positive. And I was very scared. I didn't know really what that meant. I knew that I had wanted to understand my genetic history, but I hadn't given much thought to what would come next. And my experience with the genetic counselor is something that I've talked about a lot because I think it's important to point out what not to do, frankly. The genetic counselor spoke to me about some of my options, but she really only focused on some of the preventative options I had to address my risk for ovarian cancer, which, as you may know, BRCA1 also carries a higher risk for. So she told me, and again, I'm an 18-year-old college kid. She tells me, you're at risk for ovarian cancer, so you might want to consider having children earlier in life so that you can then remove your ovaries. And I was not at any point in my life where that sort of advice would be helpful because I was in college. Kids had not crossed my mind yet. And she said, in terms of breast care, that I should begin early aggressive screening, MRIs, mammograms much earlier than I would to be able to catch something early. And to me, that sounded, that's the right decision for a lot of people. But for me, it sounded like I would be prolonging the inevitable and simply waiting around for my ticking time bomb on my chest to go off. So I actually took a little step back. I put it out of my mind for a few months. I went and studied abroad. But then when I came back, it was time I knew to face the future. And so I actually ended up meeting with a few doctors. And I'm so glad that I chose to meet with other doctors and get second and third opinions because the genetic counselor, I felt, did me a disservice by not disclosing with me all the options that I had. And that may have changed, frankly, since then, because I did have these I did go through this about 10 years ago, so much more is known now. I'm sure the genetic counseling procedures are much different. But I met with a few doctors, one of whom who told me she was seeing more and more young women opt for prophylactic bilateral mastectomy and reconstructive surgery. And by the end of that meeting, I knew that it was a no-brainer for me to go in that direction, simply because, as I said, I did not want to be walking around every day simply wondering when the other shoe was going to drop. So I ended up getting a prophylactic bilateral mastectomy just before I graduated college, which was wonderful because I was able to schedule the surgeries. I had built-in time to recover because I did it right before spring break. There is, of course, a certain irony in having your breasts removed on college spring break when so many young women are around beach areas in the United States showing theirs off. But of course, I employ a fair amount of dark humor when talking about my experience with my breasts because I think it's the only way you can get through something that has the potential to be so morbid and scary. So I got this done, and I was able happily to sort of put it behind me. I moved on with my life. I'm very, very happy with the results of the mastectomy and reconstructive surgery, and I'd be happy to share a little bit more about what I had done. I felt wonderful in terms of my body image and my sexuality and my ability to just go out into the world and be exactly who I was. And then a few years after my experience was when Angelina Jolie came out and wrote an op-ed talking about her experience. And it really, really resonated with me because up until that point, this is a few years after my experience, I had gotten a lot of questions from people when I would explain to them what I had done. They'd say things like, why did you do something so drastic so young? Weren't you worried about being able to find a husband? And aren't you worried that you might miss out on the joys of breastfeeding by removing your breast so young? And Angelina's op-ed was able to really demystify a lot of those questions. I think not just for me, but many women grappling with these decisions. And so my reaction to Angelina Jolie's story, even though this was several years following my surgeries, led me to really appreciate and internalize that when you're going through something like this, it's really important to have a community around you. And that's why I decided to write this book, because it helps to hear from and connect with other people who have been through similar experiences, not just to seek advice, but also simply to commiserate. This book that I've written, Beat Breast Cancer Like a Boss, is not where you can go to find specific advice for how to deal with your medical situation. You're not going to find that here. But what you're going to find, and what I know Mary and Cara can also attest to, is that everybody, frankly, goes through this in their own way. And it can be a challenge and a journey finding what works for you and overcoming all of the individual obstacles that we all face when we're going through something like this. Everybody faces different challenges that they may not have foreseen at the beginning of their trial. Also, of course, this book has a bunch of celebrities, including some who are here with us tonight. And there is something to be said about being able to read about people you admire for what they've achieved in their professional lives, including some, celebrities, people we read about in magazines all the time. In a similar way, that's how I internalized Angelina's story. It meant something to me that this beautiful, famous, sexy woman had made similar choices and probably went through the same sort of internal debate that I did when facing similar health trials. And there's something about that celebrity fairy dust that I do think particularly resonates with people. But at the end of the day, this book at its core is about adding to that virtual community that so many of us seek when we're going through a health challenge. And of course, you can't call up your favorite celebrity and ask them a bunch of questions about how it is they went through their cancer journey. But my hope is that this book provides the next best thing. And I think there's enough variety in this book in terms of stages of breast cancer, from previvors to metastatic thrivers to everybody in between, as well as backgrounds, as many as possible, racial backgrounds represented. So I think there's really something in here for everybody. And I think in each of the 30 stories, there's going to be something that resonates with everybody. And I think Kara and Mary, as we turn it over to their introductions, I think they are two women who just exemplify some of those incredibly varied, but at their core, universal stories of experience and resilience. So I'm just so thrilled to have them here tonight and for you all to be a part of this wonderful conversation.
Ali, thank you so incredibly much. On behalf of the Force community, we just want to thank you for sharing your stories, bringing the stories of so many others together in this book, and bringing this event tonight to life, because it really will spread awareness and make us all feel less alone in our own journeys. So thank you so much for joining us. So to introduce our next panelist in Beating Breast Cancer Like a Boss, Cara De Aguardi, I'm going to be reading an excerpt from Ali's book. In 2011, Cara was half watching a story from CBS New York reporter Stacey Sager, in which Sager described her battle with breast cancer and early ovarian cancer and how she credited genetic testing with saving her life. Cara's mother passed away from ovarian cancer in 1997, and Cara believed that her late mom was steering her towards the BRCA test. Cara, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me tonight, and Ali for writing this really important book. I was thinking about what you were saying about community and women really who come together to support each other. And it's funny, one of the women I first spoke to about being a BRCA carrier was someone who really disliked me on American Idol. And I thought that was really funny. So, but you know, when it came to helping me with this issue that I had, she was so giving and told me all about her experience. And I guess the point I'm making is, you know, in high school and when we're younger as women, we're not always on each other's side. But when it comes to our breasts and cancer and anything to do with that, it seems like every woman will drop whatever they're doing to speak to another woman who is going through, whether it's cancer or finding out that they do have a gene. And I wish, you know, we could just think about that in terms of when we raise our daughters, and you know, it's about bonding together from the get-go, because we have so much to offer each other. The reason that I found out that I had BRCA2 was really because of another woman who was my aunt. She was my mother's best friend, and my mother had died of ovarian cancer. But at the time, I didn't really put really much credence about having a genetic anything, because I was Italian, I wasn't Ashkenazi, Jewish, or and really, to be honest, I didn't know much about the gene. So my aunt always watched television, and it wasn't something that I really watched during the day on a Sunday. And I was on Broadway at the time. I was playing Roxy in Chicago, and this woman came on and started talking about, you know, her family history and the fact that she had had cancer and she was going to do this genetic test. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And something about her story made me stop and think, I should get this test. And I've always kind of looked at life as, you know, God or whatever you believe in puts these signs in front of you, and you just have to be open. And something about that woman's interview just stuck with me. And I went back to LA and I asked my doctor for a test, and he said, why would you need a test? And I said, well, my mother died of ovarian. He's like, yeah, but that's, you know, I don't think you need a test for that. And he was one of the most well-known gynecologists in LA. But I insisted, and of course came back with a positive BRCA2 gene, I immediately, he wanted to refer me to a doctor in Mount Sinai, and it was a male doctor. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to call a few people and ask around. I just kind of felt like I didn't know if I wanted to take a recommendation from him at that point. But I had been doing a lot of charity work for ovarian cancer, and actually was lucky enough through that to find Dr. Beth Carlin. And she was pretty much a boss in her field and was very much a straight shooter. Said to me, you know, you really by 40 should have had your, you know, a mastectomy and a prophylactic hysterectomy. Of course, I was, you know, 41 at the time. And she said, I know you're trying to be pregnant, but like the sooner you do this, the better. So I did a round of, you know, a fertility round, and I was married at the time. So created a few embryos and had them tested, was lucky enough to find a surrogate who I actually knew, and really took to heart what she was saying about getting my ovaries out as soon as possible. And you know, I just kind of listened to my doctor. I felt pretty much the way I am in work, which is I go with my gut. I do the research and then I go with my gut. And my gut was telling me that what she was saying was something that I needed to listen to and take action. And over the years, I've kind of had a very non-emotional approach to coaching other women. Of course, I'm sensitive to the fact that it's a difficult decision for them and that it's emotional, but I kind of look at it like you've just entered a war, and you know, emotion is for later. You've just got to make the choices, get through it as best you can, and worry about everything else after. You'll have a lot of time to you know, speak to people and think about, you know, there is an aftermath, of course, you know, when you don't have your ovaries, you know, there's that moment of, and you have breasts that aren't yours, you know, am I still a woman? Am I this, that, you know, and all that does come. But I think in the moment, I knew what I had to do and I just did it. And I'm grateful to the women who were by my side. And I'm grateful to Kelly, to the journalist who helped me, because she told me a week before I was going in that the doctor I had chosen was not as great as everyone thought, and that he had operated on her best friend and she was sick because he hadn't taken enough tissue out. So, you know, again, I just listened to whatever was coming towards me and made decisions from that. And I'm really lucky that I had her really as someone guiding me throughout the whole process as well. So I guess I'm going to turn it over.
Yeah, Cara, thank you so much for being so open and honest. Your story is, you know, obviously very powerful for previvors and survivors. You did it all while you were wading through years of growing your career and family planning and being faced with health decisions. So we really appreciate you sharing your time with us this evening.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, and hopefully I can help someone out there.
Excellent, thank you. So Mary Powell is our next panelist profiled in Beating Breast Cancer Like a Boss. Here is an excerpt from Mary's chapter of the book. Mary Powell served as CEO of Green Mountain Power, a Vermont energy utility, from 2008 to 2020. Under her leadership, GMP earned a spot on Fast Company's most innovative companies in the world, list 3 years in a row, 2017, 2018, and 2019. In 2015, at age 54, Mary had already been undergoing routine screenings for years because of family history of breast cancer. Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Well, first of all, thank you, Ali, so much for writing this book, and Elise for hosting this event, and Cara, I just loved hearing your story. Again, Ali, I'm so appreciative of your doing this, because you know, I just firmly believe the most important thing we have in life is our story and our life experience. And, you know, my experience is very similar to Kara's in the sense that this really is such a uniting issue, I think, for all women. And I think it's an honor any chance I get to tell my story, to be part of a series of stories like you did in your book. So thank you so much. And it's such an honor to be here. Yeah, so it's also, I guess I was thinking the first thing I want to say, you guys, is like, you know what? I love my boobs. I am so grateful. I am just so grateful that I made the decision I made, you know, so many years ago now. And, you know, it is also really powerful for me to be talking to you this time of year, because this Thanksgiving will be 25 years since my mom passed away from cancer. And she passed away when I was 35, and I was about 7 weeks pregnant with my one and only child. And I was so hopeful. The doctors had said that they thought she had, you know, really not a long time to live, but they certainly thought she had a lot longer to live than she did. And I was so thrilled, because I thought it felt really important to me that my mom would have the chance to touch the skin of my child. And she didn't, because after battling 5 cancers, that Thanksgiving Day after chemo, she passed away on her favorite holiday of the year, which was Thanksgiving, at 2 p.m., which is when we always would have been sitting at the Thanksgiving table together. And yeah, and it was a very, very powerful experience, and I think of it a lot this time of year. So talking about this topic and talking about the choices we can make to increase our chances to enjoy life, to be alive, to be there for each other, is just really, really powerful for me. And, you know, cancer has always been a huge part of my life, because my mom was diagnosed when I was 19 with her first cancer. It was lung cancer, actually. And then she had 2 different kinds of breast cancer, and she had bladder cancer, and then she had the cancer that ultimately took her life. So it was a part of my life in a really big way since I was 19, but it was a part of my life even earlier than that, because when I was quite young, probably I think about 8, I had a cousin that died of breast cancer, and she was only 27 years old. And then both of my aunts, both of my mom's sisters, had cancer. Both of them eventually died of cancer. And so, you know, honestly, one of the reasons I can sit here and say, oh my gosh, I love my boobs, is because I don't feel like I'm walking around with a freaking ticking time bomb anymore. And it is just been actually such an incredible freedom. It's brought me a new freedom and a new happiness, honestly, to have made the decision I did and to not have that feeling anymore. I also actually did have my ovaries removed about a year and a half ago as well. And so my journey was, you know, I was always worried about cancer. And in my family, nobody had tested for the BRCA gene. So, you know, I kind of kept hoping that maybe it was just that my mom's family grew up around some kind of, you know, chemical treatment plant or something in Michigan. I just kept thinking, you know, maybe there's another reason, and maybe I don't need to be walking around terrified. But you know, I always was worried. I always talked to doctors about my family history. Nobody really thought I needed to take any other action aside from a lot of screenings. I mean, I had a lot of screenings. I feel like, honestly, towards the end, one of the things that helped me make the decision was I just thought, my word, I mean, I just felt like every other month I was going for some kind of screening, and I always was being called back because there was always something they didn't like. And so it was always additional screening, additional anxiety. And then, you know, once I was in my 50s, my sister actually was diagnosed then with breast cancer. And thankfully, she did some genetic testing, and there was a newer gene called the NBN gene. It's an Eastern European gene that she had. They didn't know as much about it. Actually, they know more about it now than they did even, you know, half a dozen years ago. you know, but they did think it could be connected. And so really I went then for that genetic testing. I had to fight for it, honestly, which is just insane to me that you have to fight for these kinds of things in this day and age. But I had to really push for it and say I wanted it. I wanted a full panel, because if I didn't get the full panel, we wouldn't have seen the NBN gene. And I found out that I had it. And you know, and then the geneticists, the doctors, they still all really felt like, you know, Mary, you're doing a lot of surveillance. You know, there's not a heavy link, but there was some link with breast cancer and colon cancer. And by that time, I should also add, I lost another cousin, female cousin, to colon cancer. She was in her 50s. So, you know, I would say I was being strongly encouraged to go the way of continuing surveillance. You know, and I loved what Cara said. I identified with a lot of it. You know, I am someone who always talks. I mean, anybody who works with me knows. I always say, well, my gut is saying, I really believe our gut is our system's microprocessing unit, and it's really smart and informed by all of our life experience. And, you know, my gut just kept nagging at me. And, you know, eventually, and I did, you know, I kind of did the pros and cons. I thought about it because I worried a lot about the cost of healthcare and and unnecessary procedures. And I thought, oh, I don't want to be one of those folks just having an unnecessary procedure. And so, you know, I deliberated about it a lot. And then, you know, my gut just kept screaming at me. All I can tell you is my gut kept screaming at me. And then back to Cara's story, I also had this like weird thing with, I had this Airbnb actually out in LA that I had rented, and then I had to cancel it because it was had to do with my sister's cancer. And so I just happened to mention to the woman when I was canceling it that I was canceling related to this event that got canceled because of my sister's cancer. And we got in a cancer conversation, and she had had a preventative double mastectomy, and she was so funny because she was so clear with me. She just said, she didn't even know me, and she just said, Mary, you have to get them removed. I'll never forget that. It just kind of jarred me. But it was one of those things that my gut, you know, was part of the microprocessing. And so, yeah, so I decided to do it. And I did a lot of research, and I found this amazing, wonderful surgeon in New York City, Ray Simmons, and I had the procedure done. I took my daughter with me when we went to the plastic surgeon. I wanted to have one big procedure, have the whole thing done at the same time. So that business part of me, if we're going to do it, get it all done, bada bing, bada boom. So I had Alex come with me, and she helped me pick out my new boobs. I actually was very open. I talked to my whole team about it at work. They knew. I actually said to people, because I had very, very small breasts, I love them, but they were tiny. And so I was like, I don't know if I should go bigger. And I'll never forget somebody, we all had a good laugh, said, you know, go big or go home. So I actually didn't end up going big, but I did end up, Alex and I picked the breasts that were a tiny bit larger than what I'd had before. And then I had the procedure done. It turned out they couldn't do it all in one fell swoop because my skin tissue was too fragile. So I did have to get the expanders and go back. I think it took till about 5 weeks later that I could have the new ones inserted. But the most powerful part for me, you guys, was, I'll never forget, I was, you know, about a week post-surgery, and I went in to see Raish for my follow-up, and she came, my husband and I were in the room, and she came bursting into the examination room with this big smile and said, oh my gosh, I have such good news for you. And it was jarring because I was thinking, like, what's the news? Like, you took off my breasts. I was confused because, again, I was doing this all preventative. All my tests, the MRI, the mammogram, everything had showed that I was clear before I had this done. And the good news was that they had found that I was positive in both breasts. So I burst into tears. I didn't necessarily feel like it was, I mean, it was good news. It was good news. I'd had them taken off. But, you know, at the same time, you're like, oh my gosh, I thought I just took them off to prevent. And I really did prevent. You know, it was so powerful. so incredibly powerful. And I have no doubt that it saved my life. But as I said, it did more than, you know, I'm sure it saved my life. And I'm sure that, you know, also the other thing is, I'm sure it's also improved my mental health, I guess I want to say, since then. Because yes, it's different to get used to. Yes, they're not as soft as, you know, the tissue of a natural breast, and that was hard for me. I'm a big hugger, so when I hugged people, that was hard for me at first. But you know, the mental health benefit of just not worrying about them anymore, not viewing them as ticking time bombs. In fact, I've got to find somewhere that shirt someone gave me that said, yes, they're fake, my real ones were trying to kill me. So I feel so grateful. I feel so grateful, Ali, to have been a part of your book and to have heard your story, more of your story tonight, and Cara, yours as well. So thank you so much. An honor to be with all of you.
Thank you so much, Mary. You had me laughing a couple of times in there, and you really did share so deeply with us. You're, you know, a true inspiration to really hear about your story and how you continue to advocate for your health and the health of your family. So thank you so much for sharing with us. At this time, we're going to do a little Q&A. Thank you to all of you who submitted questions prior to the event. We will run through them now. Some questions are more specific to individual stories. Some questions we'll be asking the whole panel. But to kick it off, Ali, we want to know a little bit more about your writing process. So could you give the audience a take on how long the book process started, from the very beginning of the idea to the publishing date and the release, which was just September 15th?
Yeah, this was a project about 3 years in the making. I think I originally started talking about it in 2017, and for a long time it was just a kind of an idea that I thought maybe, yeah, we could do this. And I'm very lucky. I have some friends in the publishing world, and they helped me get my foot in the door with the people that I needed to be in touch with. But that was really only half the battle, because what I quickly found out was that in order to make a book proposal that people will accept, you need to basically write a decent portion of the book. So I had to reach out to a lot of these incredible women and basically try to beg them to talk to me, because I mean, I have so many emails that are like, hi, I'm trying to write a book. I'm in the proposal phase, trying to couch it so it seemed like it was some official thing and not just me, desperately scribbling away in a Google Doc. And luckily, so many of them were so generous with their time. And so I was really able to speak to a lot of women and collect a really incredible collection of stories before I even was submitting the proposal to publishers. And as Cara said, when women have a story to tell, it seems like they're very willing to share it, which is wonderful. And it meant that a lot of these women I was reaching out to who had never heard of me were very open with sharing their stories and being very candid with me. So Edie Falco was the first person that accepted my request for an interview. And so you can imagine that with that being number one, I was like, oh my God, the sky's the limit. I'm going to get Angelina Jolie. Obviously, it didn't work out that way. So I did definitely get some no's. Some I was really bummed not to have incorporated into the book, but I mean, I don't think it really matters, because I think the finished product has been so incredible and so powerful. Cara and Mary's stories are among just the most inspiring, I think, because of all the things that they just talked about. And of course, there's more contained within the book. So it was a very long process. It was a lot of cold calls and cold emails done when it was a slow day up on Capitol Hill, which is where I was a producer for most of the time that it took writing this book. And many of the interviews were conducted in our conveniently soundproof radio booth at the ABC News Capitol Hill reporting area. So that was very convenient. But For the most part, it has been a total labor of love, and it's been worth all those 3 years to have this come to fruition and hopefully make a difference in people's lives.
Thank you so much, Ali. We're so grateful that you kept pushing on the journey to get the book, published and made and grab the attention of all those interviewees, because the book really is phenomenal. For anybody who hasn't read it here tonight, you can purchase it on Amazon, and it will really get you through what you're going through on your current path and give you a feeling of solidarity with other women. So thank you. We can't thank you enough. So this next question, Cara, is for you. You had spoken about specifically going to a doctor, requesting testing, and receiving pushback. There's so many women that don't know that testing exists and men that don't know testing exists. So where do you think the biggest opportunity is to spread awareness as far as testing is concerned? It's such a personal choice. And what advice would you give to somebody who's confronting a doctor or a healthcare provider that isn't favorably yielding to requests for testing? So that's a two-part question there for you.
So in terms of pushback or a doctor pushing back on, letting you get the test or not, I would just sit in their office and they did what I asked them to do. I mean, that's me. So they'd be like pushing me out the door and I'd be like, oh, no, we're doing this, it's going down. So, and I found in terms of doctors, and I remember when my mother had ovarian cancer, I was 19 when she was diagnosed and 27 when she died. And my parents were mid-divorce. So I used to follow the doctors around with a notebook and just write down like whatever they were saying. Because I found that, they would say one thing and then they'd say another thing. And I was like, I got to write this down because I could have sworn they said this, or I could have sworn that. And I feel like whenever you can say to a doctor, yeah, this doesn't seem right. I should have this, you could say you really should talk to someone at Force, or you should talk to someone at Breast Care, any of the big non-for-profits, to say, I'm going to have to, unfortunately, write a letter to these, organizations and say that you're a doctor who I expressed that I had this, genetic thing with my family and you still didn't want to get me tested, or just get on Instagram. You can use a lot of things to get your message out there. And if a doctor is going to deny you a test when you've told them that you have a family history of something, people need to know this is not a doctor that you can trust. I mean, any doctor that's a gynecologist today in this stage of, where we are with awareness, that isn't allowing for the test, it's just, that's crazy to me. And if the insurance companies won't pay for it, I'm sure Force and a bunch of the other organizations out there that are involved in breast cancer awareness, there are definitely funds, grants, companies that are doing the test for a lot less. Reach out to your local hospital. I know in Maine, we had a fund at our local hospital that helped women who had BRCA with their testing. And if they were BRCA carriers who were, have a cancer, that we paid for, some of their gas bills or food or whatever it was. There's so many incredible people out there who are funding these sort of organizations that will help BRCA carriers, either with getting the test they need if they can't afford it, and even, God forbid, if they have cancer or need to get, a prophylactic mastectomy if that's what they decide. So, do your research. There's a lot of people out there that are wanting to help. I think that women who've gone through this know that it's, it's not an easy thing to go through. And Mary, I really, really enjoyed, listening to your story. My husband calls my boobs like frozen cutlets because they're so freaking not, and I loved my breasts. That was like, I could stare at them literally. I could sit back in a mirror and be like, oh, I love them. They're just, they're my thing. I didn't like my legs. I didn't like my nose. I loved my breasts. I actually took a picture the night before. I got to go find it. It's in 4 computers back. But, you know, I am so glad I did this. And I would love to say, you know, and I guess, you know, part of sharing your story is also sharing the reality, which is sometimes I do think, even though I've had this done, I do worry about just cancer in general, like that maybe I'd get pancreatic or I'd get this, or like having the gene does give me still, you know, some, you know, not crazy anxiety, but I'm aware, you know, if I'm out in the sun, I'm sort of like, maybe I should put a lot of block on. If I'm not eating healthfully or I'm not exercising, I'm like, do I really, you know, I want to try to be the most health conscious that I can without it ruining my life. You know, I'm not gonna not eat certain foods and things like that. But definitely having the surgeries has helped me cope with that, because I don't think I've ever recovered from seeing what my mother went through. I think that it absolutely put a wall around my heart to some degree that will never be taken down. I'd like to say that in some instances it does come down, you know, especially when I have my baby. But it's just when you see that the way someone looks at the end of their life from having cancer, it's really hard to come back from. So the fact, there was no question for me, just, we're done, just take them off.
Yeah, Cara, that makes, you know, a lot of sense. And I think that's an experience that a lot of people can relate to. And when you go through something like that, not only as a caregiver or as yourself, I think, you know, Mary, you touch on this, that it's so important to lean on community. And when you were going through your screenings and then your diagnosis, you were in a position of leadership. And you did touch on this a little bit, but we did have an audience member ask this question about, you know, how when you're in a position of leadership, do you decide to communicate with the team or with your, you know, immediate community? So how did you make the decision for yourself of, I'm not going to walk this road alone?
Well, I mean, for me, honestly, it kind of, I really related to a lot of what Cara just said, and it really, like, it also felt like, okay, there was no big decision in the context of having the surgery once my gut was so clear. And I also felt the same about going through it. I mean, I don't know, I was such a highly visible leader in Vermont and in this company of, you know, 600 people. And, you know, I was thinking, well, do I just sort of say I'm like going on some medical thing and then have people project what's going on with me? Like, it was really like a 3-minute conversation in my head. And then the obvious thing with my style and who I am was, I'm going to be really public about it with folks. And actually, it was mostly that I wanted people who I knew and who I worked with to know what was going on for me and why I was making the choices I was making. And then because of the response I got from all of them, that's why I ended up writing, you know, an op-ed about it that then turned out to help a lot of people. And it helped me too. I mean, it's an incredible experience. I think when we have tough things in life, it's this really magnificent experience when then your experience can help others. And that's really what happened. Is once I went public about it, I had random people stop me on the street in Vermont. I had you know, employees who opened up about challenges that were going on in their lives and with their family. And so, you know, I'm a real believer in leading with love. I'm a real believer actually in just the power of love in general in life. I think it's the most powerful force. I think we really need it now a lot. And, you know, and when you share something like this that's going on, it cracks your heart open. And then it allows more love to come in and it allows more love to flow out to others. So it was, you know, for me, it was about a 3-minute debate in my head. And then it was all transparent all the way. Everybody I worked with. And in fact, sometimes in hindsight, I think, geez, I don't know, maybe it was a lot. I gave them a lot of details, but people seem to appreciate, you know, really having the nitty gritty.
Excellent, thank you. And so, Ali, obviously from, you know, documenting Kara and Mary's stories, you see all these different ways in which people are expressing themselves during these journeys. And, you know, to give a little teaser of the book, you talk a little bit about your mentor in your first story, Cookie, who kind of approached things a little bit differently. So for you as the author, what is your biggest takeaway just seeing how women from all walks of life are, you know, handling their decisions differently, and but ultimately coming together to support each other? If you could give us a little view into that.
Yeah, thank you for asking about Koki. She is the person who leads off the stories in the book. Her story serves as the introduction, and it wasn't a fluke. It's for a very specific reason. I'll explain that by telling a little story about Koki. For those who may know or don't, Koki was a longtime journalist with ABC News and NPR, and she was at ABC when I was there. And you couldn't find a more supportive mentor to have. She took every young woman in her path under her wing and was such an incredible source of support for everybody who crossed her path. When I interviewed her, I had known about a battle she went through, I believe in the early 2000s. I could be wrong about that, but it was, in any event, something that had happened many years before. And so when I went to her and asked her questions, it was as a survivor. I had basically put that term on her. And she very patiently answered all my questions about how did you get through it. And she has a lot of wonderful advice, including my favorite anecdote is she says that after her diagnosis, she went to the beach with her family for a vacation because she was like, it's not going to spread to my liver in a weekend. So you got to go on and live your life. And that's exactly what she did. And that's part of what makes her story so powerful. But the other part of the story is that when I was interviewing her, and she's taking me through her previous fight, what I didn't know is that her cancer had spread. It had returned and it had spread to other parts of her body. And she was sick. And she passed away a year and change after we spoke. And the fact that she didn't want to talk about it, it didn't affect her talking about her previous fight. And she was just so present in speaking with me because she knew that her story was so powerful, underscored to me in a way I really hadn't fully appreciated at that point that you know, none of us, who can say that we've beat anything? And it's unfair to those for whom the drugs have not worked, and for those for whom the science has failed them, to say that because they have since passed away, that they didn't beat it and that they lost the fight. I mean, I think battle terminology can be really helpful when talking about empowering yourself in a cancer battle, but at the same time, it does have that potential to set up a problematic binary where if you're not winning, you're losing the fight. And I don't like that at all. And Koki, to me, is someone who exemplifies what it means to beat breast cancer every day of your life. She beat it every day. She got up and went to work, spent time with her family, pursued the things in life that made her happy, even though she knew that she was sick and she probably wasn't going to get better. So the lesson that Koki taught me was one I didn't fully learn until she passed away, and until I realized how meaningful it was that we had that conversation when we did. And so that is the tone that I really wanted to set, and the message I wanted to impart at the very beginning of the book, that this is a book, it's called Beat Breast Cancer Like a Boss, but I don't define beating breast cancer as simply going into remission and remaining cancer-free for the rest of your life, because it's so much more than that. It's the mental journey. It's about facing life defiantly and living your life on your terms, even though sometimes that changes following a cancer diagnosis. So I think if the title has anybody maybe second guessing picking up the book, because it does have the word beat in the title, which is a topic of some controversy in the cancer community, I would simply submit that is how I approach that term and how I approach the advice. that is throughout the book. And I think Koki's story really is the embodiment of that.
Well, thank you so much, Ali, for expounding upon that. We're just right up against our time here. So Cara and Mary, thank you so much as well for sharing your life's work with us, for answering our many viewer and audience questions. We're very lucky to have all of you here in the Force family, and we're grateful for your participation and honesty in your writing on tonight's webinar. So thank you very much to our panelists for joining us this evening.
Thank you, guys. Really
Thank you so much.
awesome
Wonderful.
to do that.
Hope you enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed tonight's presentation, please register for our upcoming 2 expert-led webinars in October. Tomorrow, actually on October 1st at 6 p.m. is the Maintenance Therapy Options for Ovarian Cancer, presented by Dr. Barbara Norquist. Dr. Norquist is a gynecologic oncologist affiliated with the University of Washington. She will discuss the role of maintenance therapy using PARP inhibitors and other agents in women with and without BRCA or other gene mutations. And then on October 22nd at 6 p.m. Eastern Time is the ABCs of Cancer Genetics, presented by Dr. Lisa Medelinski, CGC, who has provided cancer genetic counseling services for over 25 years. Dr. Medelinski will specifically address questions about genes that cause an increased risk of certain types of cancer and tackle concerns of people who have been diagnosed with or those at high risk for hereditary cancers. You will receive registration links for these events in your follow-up emails from tonight's presentation. Please continue to reach out to Force for your support and information needs. Remember that you are not alone. Thank you so much for attending, and good night, everyone.